let's commence by talking a little bit about the postponement of the CEC elections due to the pandemic. Nevertheless, I think it's of popular interest. What kind of watershed do you see once the CEC elections actually happens in the party?
I think the most important watershed in the party history was actually the 2008 general election and the subsequent leadership team that was formed after 2008. So the DAP suffered electoral defeats upon defeats from 1995, 1999 and 2004. But suddenly in 2008, we won in places that none of us thought we would win. And we won power in Penang. So in 2008, those who were elected in 2008, I think they are now in their 40s or late 30s. Some of us were elected in their late 20s. I was elected at the age of 31. So I think this generation is now at their prime. So I think it's more like a generational affairs. And I think the strength of the DAP is that we have Kisiang's generation, we have Guan Ning's generation, we have this generation of we call the 2008 cohort, and we have also a younger generation who are now in their early 30s, who were elected in 2013 and 2018. So I think that is the wholesome of DAP, in which we have 4 generations. And hopefully this third generation, I would call, will play a more important role in the coming party election. So I think this is a generational affairs. But this thing actually happened, I mean, this lineup has been there for a long time. So the whole generation is there since 2008.
I suppose the natural question to follow would be, what do you think this 2008 generation characterizes?
I think we characterize teamwork, we characterize a whole cohort. Before 2008, we had no taste of power. We were seen as a permanent opposition party. And we needed just one single figure in the form of Kisiang, in the form of Guan Ning, to lead the whole movement, because it was actually difficult to get people. But the 2008 election afforded DAP a whole generation of talent. And I think this whole generation has been working together since 2008, or even earlier, but I think particularly since 2008, working in formal positions. I was co-opted. I was not elected in 2008. I was co-opted into the CEC. Anthony was elected in the 2004 party election. Tony was elected in the 2008 party election. So this cohort has been there since 2008.
The CEC, the elections, DAP's elections, often come under quite a great deal of scrutiny because there is a public perception out there that even as elections happen, nothing really changes very much in the way the party operates within. Is this true? And what kind of how incorrect is such a perception? And what kind of reform is actually needed at this time?
2 things. First of all, see, those days, the Star would have probably 2 journalists specifically dedicated to cover MCA. News Straits Times would have 1 person covering MCA and probably 2 or 3 person covering UMNO. I bet there's none specifically dedicated to cover DAP. No one actually knows how DAP functions. At least, I mean, among the press community, I don't think there are sufficient number of people who really understood how DAP election happened. So I think that tells a lot about our press That I mean, the DAP has been a significant force at least since 2008, but no one actually bothered to understand how this works. The DAP party election is like a parliamentary system where you elect the MPs and then the MPs elect the Prime Minister. There's nothing wrong about it. So it's an indirect election. You elect the CEC members, and among the CEC members, they elect the Secretary General. And that is how the party functions. It's not a presidential system. If people think that a presidential system is better than a parliamentary system, then change your parliamentary system. So I mean, if you ask me, there are these talks that direct election of the president is better. Then why do we have a parliamentary system in the parliament?
When people talk about reform within the DAP, what do you think they mean?
Well, there are people who think that there should be direct election of the SecGen. We have term limits for SecGen, not in other parties. There are people who think that the party should include more young people, which we are very young, comparatively as a party. There are people who think that the party should include more voices from the young, but we have the youngest cohort of elected reps. There are people who think that we do not have enough Malay representation, which is an issue that we will have to deal with. We need more Malay leaders. There are people who think that Guan Ning and Kisiang has an overbearing influence on the party, but they also put the most effort into leading the party. So, I mean, I do hope that there will be more people spending time trying to understand the DAP and have a genuine discussions on how to change, if there is anything that we need to do. One thing that I think the DAP get it right and other parties will have to change is the way we structure the party system. The DAP has an elected national committee, national CEC. The state leadership is elected, and they are elected by branches. We have a very keen and actually less formal organization of the parliamentary level. So my joke is that you may have state warlord in DAP, but you will not have parliamentary warlord. Now, if we go back to history, UMNO state leadership was elected up until 1960. But because of the tussle between Tunku and Mahathir, they abolished state election and they focus on party election at the divisional level. So today's UMNO problem is they're stuck with the parliamentary warlord. Everything is structured at the parliamentary level. I think in terms of system, actually, at some point, other parties will have to follow the DAP structure where you have election at the state level and to devolve more power from the center to the state, both in the party and also in the government structure. Because our governing structure is very much mirroring UMNO structure, where power is centered at the national level and assuming that most of the Menteri Besar were from UMNO. But this is no longer the case. So at some point, state government will ask for more power and will have to be given more power to organize at the state level. And some of the recent incidents shows that state has a lot of role to play in the political structure, and it's actually good to empower the state.
You made a point earlier. I mean, we know the DAP to be a multiracial party, and yet, in terms of its representation, there is still a lot of thinking about having better Malay representation. So this snare of communalism even seems to seize non-racial based parties because the heritage or the lineage of communalism is very deep. our country was basically based on communal lines politically. In the party, there is a perceived schism between people who very much want to advocate a more open party to reach a wider base. You have been a great and very vocal advocate of that. But there are people who believe that they need to protect almost preciously their traditional base. This seems to be a major contradiction within the DAP. How is it being discussed and how is it being rationalized?
I think on the one hand, we're happy that we are held to our held accountable to the highest level, highest standard, in the hope that we will have a fully multi-ethnic organization when probably no one would ask Bersatu or UMNO or say PAS to have a multi-ethnic composition at the CEC level, at the top level. So I think for the DAP to be held accountable to that, perhaps maybe unfair, but it's also a good standard to pursue. So in the long run, we should envisage ourselves as a party that has many Malays, that has many non-Malays, and not only we focus on identity of ethnicity, but at the same time we also look at other identities and look at the common ground. The DAP has now established its what they call footprint in all states in the country, which is quite unique for a political party. The DAP has indigenous people from Sabah, from Sarawak, as elected reps. I think these are quite remarkable. But to deal with the questions of tensions between ethnic groups, I think we will need to do more. We need to do more as a party to educate Malaysians that they are Malay anxiety, they are also non-Malay anxiety. So some of the concern raised by some members of the DAP is that because they are non-Malay anxiety, you cannot ignore non-Malay anxiety. So, and what we are saying is basically, we're not ignoring non-Malay anxiety. We're saying that Malaysians, whether Malays or non-Malays, at some point should feel very comfortable and could be less concerned about our anxiety and to find common ground. So it's a difficult process. What we are facing is a reflection of what the nation is facing. So if we can eventually comfort everyone within the DAP that it's okay to be open, it is okay that we don't focus on the anxiety, we focus on building something together beyond ethnicity, but understanding the anxiety, then we can deal with the nation as a whole. So I think anxiety is something that if we only read Bahasa or English press, maybe we think that anxiety is a Malay anxiety is the only problem. But actually it's action reaction. Being whatever you call it, a bipolar society, being a multi-ethnic society, that anxiety is something that we will have to deal with together. So I'm not taking the approach to say that you're wrong to talk about protecting a certain identity. What I'm saying is that whatever we do, let's recognize that they are anxiety, but at the same time, we can move forward after we acknowledge that they are anxiety.
As a major strategic figure,
I don't think so.
In the DAP, we have arrived. I mean, we arrived in May 9th, and there was this grand euphoria, and there was a lot of discussion about, basically a post-communal age. What we have seen in reality is a complete backflip, almost 180% degree, where it's almost become primordial now. And what do you think the equilibrium is in this age of post-truth. How do you grapple with this complex turnaround?
I think let's go back a bit further. Politic wrote something interesting. Say the new economic model was some form of political order, which encompasses politics but also economics. Vision 2020 was another so-called political order, which lasted the government for quite a while. And perhaps if we look back a bit further, this nation was founded upon three periods: a post-colonial period, the NEP generation, and the Vision 2020 generation. Of course, we have the 15 years between Abdullah Badawi and Najib, where the nation heads nowhere.
Yeah.
And during that period of time, UMNO turned right. UMNO turned right in a massive way. After Hisham waved the crease in 2005, and in the more exaggerated version after 2008. So we have been in that sort of situation for 15 years. Difficult to get out because there is always action reaction. But COVID and also Sheraton move probably now hopefully shape everyone's mind that perhaps we need to start the conversation to think about a new political order. How to build the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And within that context, DAP has a role to play. DAP, while we started very much as a protest movement, we have been in government at different levels for 12 years. So how do we combine and eventually bring everyone along to see that we have a role to build a political order that will deal with the interests, anxiety, and aspiration of sufficient number of Malaysians in order to create a stable society, in order to find compromises, and in order to move forward together. I think that is our historic role. Not easy. It is not easy to think of Malaysia being able to move away from the chaotic racialized situation in the last 15 years and go into something new. I think that is very challenging, but that is something that we may have to do.
I'm very drawn to this idea of a new political order. It's very ambitious. It needs serious thinking, not to mention philosophizing. Yet I want to draw you to a statement you made recently. And I'm not very interested in what DAP's relationship is with UMNO or what channels are open or Datuk Sri Anwar or whatever it is. But you made a very interesting statement when Datuk Sri Anwar made that call that he has the numbers and Malaysia's government is going to fall. And you were quoted as saying, fall or not, it has damaged Muhyiddin. It would seem also it has compromised the credibility of the opposition quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And while we talk of new political orders, this is the reality of our politics today. Kudalia politics. And the public response, of course, is what kind of politics is this? So I throw that question to you now. What kind of politics is this?
We are, of course, suffering from, in a way, our success. We successfully removed or defeated a one-party state. Okay, the result of the 2018 election is that there's not going to be another one-party state like that of UMNO. But we haven't found a way to accommodate each other in a political system that will result in the society being able to move forward. So Tan Sri Muhyiddin was not able to get out of this UMNO thinking and hoping that he can continue to command some form of a one-party state, even with a slim majority and even having to depend so much on others to supply the number. The Tan Sri Muhyiddin is not able to see that he has to treat his allies better and he has to treat the opposition more equitably. Anthony Look, on behalf of the DAP, suggested that there should be confidence supply agreement, which we all support. It gives the government a chance to negotiate with the opposition and to build, say, at least 1 year or 1.5 years or even 2 years of stability so that everyone can focus on dealing with COVID and its aftermath. But the government was not prepared. So we are having a situation where the mindset of people running the show is still pre-2018. But we are dealing with new realities. We're dealing with new realities where UMNO is not going to be the singular dominant force. And although some of them hope to resurrect that order, we're dealing with a situation where in the years to come, we will form coalition government where the Prime Minister's role is not to act as presidential premier, but actually as the person to unite a coalitions of parties with similar strengths. This idea that you form a government with parties of similar strength hasn't drawn on people. But actually the Pakatan Harapan government is a party, it's a coalition with parties that has similar strengths. But of course, failure to manage the relationship between Mahathir and Anwar, it's not just Mahathir, but it's both, and failure to recognize that there were other Trojan horse interested to be Prime Minister, failure to find common ground, I think that resulted in the fall of the government. But perikatan is even worse. Because people who are running the show fail to recognize that there's no more presidential premier, there's no more one-party state.
If we are in a state of such fluidity and undecidedness, not indecisiveness, but undecidedness, what is your response to the call by Dr. Mahathir and Cooley yesterday of a unity government? It seems pretty reasonable.
I think political unity should come in the form of parliamentary democracy. It means we recognize that today you are the winner, tomorrow you may be in the opposition. But the opposition recognizes the government of the day for what they have won. The government recognizes that the next day they may be in the opposition and find an equilibrium, find a way, a parliamentary mechanism to work together. Unity government or not, I don't believe that you can have a unity government of 202 MPs or 222 MPs. It is almost impossible to form a singular unity government that includes 2/3 or three quarters of the MPs. I don't think that sort of unity government would exist. It is better for us to recognize that Parliament is the mechanism and we govern through drawing legitimacy from bipartisanship. It's difficult to do. It's very difficult to do because we are trained to think that government knows best. Very difficult for ministers to take suggestions from the opposition. Very difficult for government to recognize the opposition is actually an equal partner. But there are some people who have basically learned this. For instance, Menteri Besar of Johor. In his speech to the State Assembly, he said the opposition is a strategic partner to the government. And it's time that we don't treat them as an alien outside the system. Well, we'll still wait to see how far he will go and how prepared he is to recognize this new reality. But the point is, it can be done. It can be done at the federal level. There's no need for a grand unity government. If you recognize that we can leave the fight to election, let's govern together. Let's see the opposition as core governing partner through a parliamentary committee system. So the minister will still run the show, but ministerial officers come to parliamentary committees, share with opposition MPs, share with backbenchers their challenges. MPs from both sides find common ground, recommend to the government. Government takes those recommendations in good faith and implement some of them. You can eventually agree upon, say, 70% of common ground. The other 30% we leave it to another day. We can fight during the election. The election can be about that 30% of differences because of values, because of ideology, because of different interests that we represent. But we get 70% of common ground, of common human affairs, common governing issues. We get it done. I think that should be the mindset.
It's very idealized and very interesting. It's not that it's not happened in this country when all those elements of communalism and ethnicity and religion cease to be instrumentalized. But such a situation would normally require a cataclysm of some kind.
I think COVID is the biggest catalyst you can get in a century.
Yeah.
But anyhow, much as what I say looks like an idealistic proposal, fundamentally we should recognize that we have differences and we need to find a mechanism to manage differences. The idealized version of the world under the old regime is that we are not different. We should be assimilated. If we are not prepared to be part of my vision, you're out. But I think we have come to a stage where we should see differences as our strength and capitalize on managing differences. Running a government is not about enforcing uniformity. Running a government is about managing differences and making differences work for everyone. I think that philosophical change is important. Otherwise, we'll continue to be stuck at attempting to dominate each other. It won't work.
Yeah. I want to drag you back a bit. Yeah. May 9th seems a very distant memory. To some, it was euphoric. To others, it was a missed opportunity. A friend of mine described it as a mirage. Nevertheless, how would you evaluate the DAP's performance while in government?
I think the DAP performance in the government, given that this was the first opportunity as members of the federal government, I would say all of us did quite well within the constraint we face. We're getting used to learning about the bureaucracy, learning about working within a coalition, working within a system where there is no dominant force. And DAP was being accused of being the dominant force, but among the Malay ground, and in the non-Malay ground, DAP was accused of being silent, being subjugated to Mahathir's interests. I think within all these constraints, we did quite well. It was difficult. It was a steep learning curve. We made mistakes. There are things that we did well. There are things that we didn't do well. I think we'll have to leave that to history to judge. But I would say that learning experience was important for us to move on later.
Among all these constraints you mentioned, that you were a huge influence on Mahathir, was also the perception that DAP was rather arrogant while in power. Is that a complete misperception, or is there some truth in that?
I would say that we were in an environment that we did not control the narrative. We were in an environment of free speech, post-truth situation, where everyone else were trying to shape perception. Perhaps we spent least time to shape public perception, and we did not believe in propaganda, or we did not do propaganda, and we became the recipients of perception shaped by other people. I think moving forward, we will have to engage the public in shaping public opinion, not as propaganda, but in a more concerted manner. In a more concerted manner, explaining what we stand for and how our values has a positive impact on ordinary Malaysians. I think we're working very hard on policies, but we may not have communicated our values and what we desired or what we aspired. I think we have that communication gap was quite apparent. But it's not just us. It's basically we were in a new situation. Everyone was grappling with how to communicate in a pseudo-free environment with everyone else running propaganda just sniping at you.
I want to press you a little on that, because it's I don't. It's not just 2008. It was before that, by 1998, and this new alliance of Pakatan Rakyat and Pakatan Harapan, the various incarnations. I mean, one of the great skills was, of course, the ability to work the ground and messaging. How could an alliance like this, who then comes into power, lose that skill so fast?
It is very easy. It was difficult actually, but then it's easier to work as to shape public opinion as a protest movement. But it's difficult to manage interests as government. In opposition, you can stir up emotion. But in government, you have to manage interests. And we are actually a grand coalition. Pakatan on one end, Bersatu on the other end. It was a grand coalition of parties that were previously not together. But moving into governing, it took effort to put together a concerted position. But I think perhaps we did not work hard in getting everyone to speak on the same page. That process came too fast, and I don't think we have spent enough time getting everyone to agree upon a singular agenda and also focus within a short span of time. And we were facing an opposition that was just ready to burn the house down. So I warned much earlier. I say in March 2019 and also in October 2019, I say Pakatan could end up as a half-term government because the other side was just about to burn the house down. They were not interested to govern or not interested to play the role of opposition. So we were not given time, and it was a steep learning curve. We didn't do fantastically well, but I think within those constraints, when history judges, I think will be judged fairly.
So if I can just kind of encapsulate it. So essentially, you feel that Pakatan Harapan was still a protest movement when we took over government, and that the process of incarnation took a lot longer than expected, is it?
Or we were not given time. I mean, it was a protest movement moving into governing. like any other situation, okay, like any other change of government, very often, even in United States, in UK, when you run as opposition, you are very much a protest movement. This is not unique to Malaysia. But when you govern, you have to govern coherently. So that transition that happens in other countries more smoothly because they are an established democracy. So we were trying to do two things. We were trying to transit from a permanent opposition to governing while we were trying to do democratization. Because 2018 was not just a change of government per se. 2018 was also democratization. For the first time, we defeated a one-party state. We were trying to create a state that is non-partisan. We were trying to create I was pushing for defense white paper together with Minister Mat Sabu. We were trying to conduct various reform so that the state eventually is a neutral party in a democracy. We're trying to introduce parliamentary committees, bipartisan committees. So all these democracy building processes coupled with transiting from opposition to governing. I think it came too fast and we were not ready for that multifaceted challenge.
You have written quite a lot about the Sheraton move and the fall of PH, and a lot of what happened. Increasingly people are doing that. There seems to be a huge vacuum though, which is why did it happen? What were the inherent frailties and fragilities of the PH coalition?
Why it happened? It happened at three levels. One, the Mahathir-Anwar relationship. Number two, other people who are interested to be Prime Minister. And the third part will be this ethnic anxiety among the Malays, anxiety among the non-Malays that were whipped up by the then opposition. So I think at these three levels, when it was combined, it becomes a very difficult situation to handle. In October 2019, there was an attempted coup. That attempted coup was spearheaded by Hamzah Zainuddin, Asmin Ali, and Hishamuddin Hussein. The idea at that time was to create a government without Anwar. But how to create a government without Anwar? At that time, the idea was to sack the DAP and Amanah from the coalition. DAP has 42, Amanah has 11. So they were thinking of sacking DAP and Amanah, but replacing it with 18 from PAS, 18 from GPS, Sarawak, and 17 from Hishamuddin, which so happened to be 53 as well. So the idea was, without DAP and Amanah, Anwar would not have support to be the next Prime Minister. So it was very much intertwined. The three problems that I mentioned earlier, they are linked. By whipping up the anger against the DAP among the Malays, it provided justification to sack the DAP. By sacking DAP, it denies Anwar's and support for Anwar to be Prime Minister. So all this will whip up within a few months' time, particularly after the so-called Asmin video came about. Of course, the rest were history.
Was Dr. Mahathir insulated from all of this? Or what was his level of knowledge of all these?
I would say when we formed the government, Dr. Mahathir was not prepared to accept Anwar as core governing partner. And I think Anwar was also not prepared to be running a government together with Mahathir. So there was this thinking that there will be a Mahathir period, there will be an Anwar period of governing. Inherently, that was not sustainable. I have advocated, even during that time, that it should be a Mahathir Anwar government and Anwar Mahathir government. Of course, there were people who warned me that a Mahathir Musa government would not work, just as a Mahathir Anwar government would not work. But it was in our interest, in the interest of all Malaysians, to see a successful Mahathir Anwar government and Anwar Mahathir government. Mahathir should sit in Anwar's cabinet, Anwar should have sat in Mahathir's cabinet. Those were not done. Both of them, I think, eventually pay a price.
What was your relationship like with Dr. Mahathir?
I think he's a good listener. I think he has some very clear, grand ideas about the region, about Malaysia's place in the world that not many other people share. So I enjoy talking to him about defense. I enjoy talking to him about how to see Malaysia's role in the region. I don't particularly enjoy talking to him about the economy. I think some of his economic ideas are stuck in the era in which Malaysia pressed down wages to export to the United States. We were doing very well at some point, but those recipes may not necessarily work for the future. And I think Dr. Mahathir is stuck not being able to recognize that Malays are 70% urban. But it's not only him. It's not only him. Many leaders, many Malay leaders, and also others, think that Malays are essentially a rural population. They have no agency. Therefore, they needed to be represented by politicians. And this idea that Malays are weak, Malays are being bullied, that idea eventually is not helpful in the political discourse. So I was trying to convince Dr. Mahathir to recognize that actually more than 70% Malays are urban people. Even those in rural areas are very sophisticated. They have their agency. As a nation, we should tap into their agency. We should recognize that every Malaysian deserves a better future. And we will have to rethink about how we look at our economy so that we can move as a nation towards a better future for everyone.
Talking about the future, and I fall back on your book, The Great Reset, your articles, and quite frequently you write about the young. And there seems to be, especially at this period, a great dismay with older politicians, the hope for the young. The young are a very multifarious lot. The young in Sabah and Sarawak are different from the young in the peninsula. Isma and Perkasa are full of young people. And then, of course, there's a very progressive movement that is young. But eventually, they all fold into a kind of party, and they are very impressive when they're on their own, good minds. But party structures don't seem to permit this evolution of the young, this party culture of yes sir, no sir, three bags full sir. Are we delusional about the young as long as this older generation is still there, determining what structures are?
Well, as I say, I think the old order has a problem in having a structure that protected parliamentary warlords, particularly the UMNO structure. Bersatu was trying to recreate an UMNO structure, which is not helping them at all. And the second point is that the ground has shifted. So you go to a kampung in Johor or kampung in Pahang, you will see someone who is at the age of 60, 70, and you ask, where's your kids? Oh, he's in KL. You have a huge population of Malaysians, particularly Malays, who came from everywhere but congregated in the Klang Valley. But they are voters when they go back to vote. This whole political idea that we are a rural nation and this whole structure that put parliamentary warlord as the organizers of our system, both UMNO and actually parliament, is resulting in the gap between the reality and the structure. So you have a superstructure that doesn't represent the economic basis. And that's where contradiction happen. So how to deal with the contradiction? To deal with the contradiction is to actually renew and re-evaluate our understanding, our sociological and anthropological understanding of our society. Our society has changed in the last 50 years. Our society are now living in a situation where rural patron-client relationship will not work. However, you pave the road in a kampong, in Peninsula, I don't mean Sabah Sarawak because they are of a different situation. You pave the route very well to a kampong in Johor, you'll bring the kids to KL. Yet, no one cares about, or no one actually put front and center about the questions of jobs, pay, education of their kids, transport, housing. These are not put front and center in our political discourse that concern so many people. Race was the number one issue. Religion is the number two issue. But actually, there is a common ground. There is a common ground where most Malaysians want better pay, better job, better transport, better housing, better education. So I think that vacuum is for all of us to fill, whether young and old. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, the DAP has been a very young party in our entire history. Kisang started very young. Guan Ning started very young. My generation, many of us started very young. And we have a cohort which is now at their 30 years old. So perhaps we have the formula.
Back in opposition, and every opposition is a government in waiting, but we've had events in Perak. We've had what has been perceived as a bit of a debacle with the budget vote 2021. Dato Sri Shafi Abdal has said that we must have the courage to really look to the future, be a government in waiting, and perhaps change the opposition leader. What is the consensus, state of consensus and cohesion among the opposition today, right now?
We will have to be prepared to deal with a potential snap election sometime in 2021. But at the same time, it is not just the opposition looking for a new formula. Everyone in Perikatan is looking for a new formula. UMNO is looking for a new formula. UMNO has to deal with the legacy and or liability, to be precise, of Najib and Zahid and the court cluster Mahkamah. And at the same time, UMNO will have to deal with this situation where they are clashing with Bersatu. They are clashing with Bersatu. They will have to decide whether they're going to fight Bersatu or they're going to stay out, or they're going to continue to be subjugated to Bersatu's whim and fancy. So we are in a situation where I think there will be a lot more debates about how the opposition will look like and how the government will look like. And that debates will continue very much into 2021.
We are speaking on December 15th, where yet again this numbers thing has been brought up and defeated government and all this kind of thing. So with a period of uncertainty, there's a lot of this huffing and puffing, but the house is still standing. And with uncertainty, of course, people react very differently. Some are engaged in a great deal of intrigue. Others are filled with a great sense of hubris. What if there's a snap election and it's a hung parliament? What do you think happens?
I hope there's no snap election because of COVID. I hope there are enough people who are sensible to avoid going for a general election now. But at the same time, whoever is prepared to go for election would have to be prepared to accept the fact that the outcome of the election could be very similar to what we have now. Malaysia has been a 50-50 society since 2008.
Yeah.
In 2008, the opposition received 47% of votes. In 2013, the opposition received 51% of votes. And in 2018, Pakatan received 48% of votes in a three-corner fight situation. So this 50-50 situation, in terms of votes, has been there for a long time. In terms of seats, the chances that it will end up very similar will be very high. So the question now is that the ball is in the courts of Prime Minister Tan Sri Muhyiddin. Whether he's prepared to recognize that even for 2 more elections that he called, the chances that he will end up with a similar result, but he may be out of office. Is he prepared to see the opposition as a partner in dealing with COVID and to prepare to accept some form of ceasefire? That he will treat opposition fairly, he will bring opposition in as part of core governing through parliamentary mechanism, parliamentary committees, and be prepared to call election within a year and a half. Only after a year and a half, when hopefully COVID situation will calm down and we'll have a better economy. I don't know whether people running the shows are prepared to go there, but that should be the solution.
And what do you think it will take for him to arrive at that place? An implosion of his own coalition, or an implosion of his rather fragile partnerships?
Well, if his coalition implode now, there will have to be a general election because he's leaving himself no margin for any errors. The majority is so thin. It is like 2 seats, 3 seats, 4 seats. That is not good for the nation because the mindset is to dominate. And what I'm saying is that all of us will have to accept that we will not be able to dominate and eliminate our opponent. We will have to learn to respect our opponent. We will have to learn to work with our opponent within the coalition or within the parliamentary framework.
My last question is one that is of particular interest to you, because you've been very involved in regional issues and international issues. You okay? The pandemic is interesting, of course, in the way that it's affected Southeast Asia and the countries of the South China Sea, because it forces to insulate. And there will be strategies, of course, to have to open up at least the Southeast Asian bubble to begin with. But of course, the situation is also very disparate in various countries. Good in Vietnam, good in Thailand, increasingly bad in Malaysia, controlled in Singapore. No one even knows in Indonesia, and no one even knows in the Philippines. What kind of regional outlook and solidarity do you think can come out of this COVID experience for the region?
I think it is unfortunate that we do not have leaders in the region who really invest in regionalism at this moment. Perhaps Jokowi is more inward looking. Duterte is fighting his own battles. Muhyiddin is probably not interested in the region as well. And the richer country is not thinking about at least paying for some costs for the weaker partners in the region. So ASEAN at this moment somehow doesn't go anywhere, which is unfortunate. which is a pity. I think the larger nation and the richer nation, including Singapore and Malaysia, will have to be prepared to lead and to work together with other countries for a more regional approach to the issues. But well, that's the reality.
Yeah, but do you think the post-COVID context will be so dire that it will force us to do that?
Probably. I think ASEAN states will have to work together closer because we are facing unprecedented challenges. COVID, regional migrants. We're dealing with China and US in front of our doorsteps. We're dealing with a more hostile competitions among great powers. We will have to eventually devise some form of regional approach that is beyond saying that we are neutral and we do not want to choose. I mean, that is our position, but beyond being passive, I think we'll have to be a lot more proactive. If we look back, ASEAN perhaps was at its greatest when Suharto, Mahathir, Ramos, and Lee Kuan Yew were at their prime.
Ramos or Marcos?
Ramos.
Okay.
In the early 90s. I think the early 90s were the years that ASEAN were able to act in a concerted way, including expanding ASEAN. I mean, it took great effort for ASEAN to expand to the poorer countries in continental ASEAN. But at that point of time, you have leaders who talk to each other a lot more. You have leaders who share certain vision in the post-Cold War period. So I would say that ASEAN was probably at its strongest point in the early 90s, and partly thanks to Mahathir's leadership at that point of time. But at this moment, no one is showing leadership, and we don't have the sort of solidarity that we need to deal with the crisis.
The last one, just as a follow-up, is economic flattening, basically, the great leveler. Will ASEAN have to work hand in hand to ensure that the economies somehow start to rehabilitate in the region?
The COVID crisis will pose long-term challenges. Factories and particularly manufacturing, will become more onshore. So some of the US companies may bring back some of their factories back to the US in the long run. And we are dealing with a situation where the United States may not necessarily be able to consume that much of our products because they're having a situation where they lose their middle class.
Yeah.
In Europe, you have a huge population that actually do not have jobs or have been underemployed for years since the global financial crisis. So can we as a region continue to depend on export-oriented economic development or industrialization with the specific idea of exporting to the US and Europe? I think we can't. But what do we do? In the long run, we will have to enrich our citizens. We will need a stronger middle class in our region, in our own country, and also in the region, apart from dependent on the China market. I mean, we can depend on the China market, but the Chinese market, to a certain extent, is also quite insular.
Yeah.
It doesn't need export into the system, except raw material. Okay. China will need a lot of raw material. China will perhaps need our agriculture export, if we have. But beyond agriculture export and raw material, is China market the destination? I'm not very sure. So in the long run, ASEAN will have to enrich its citizens to build a common market and to build a market of middle class. But that is not going to be easy. Even our own country is difficult, not to mention other countries. But that is perhaps the task ahead in the next 5, 10, 15 years.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your time,
Thank you.
your language, and your thoughts. Thanks.
Thank you.